region remain imperative. Madam President, the member states of the United Nations have entrusted the Security Council with a primary responsibility for maintaining international peace and security. And in discharging these duties, the Security Council must act in accordance with the purposes and principles of the United Nations. And this responsibility calls for a unified response. The veto is not intended to be a right to obstruct, but a responsibility for final decision-making exercised in the name of international peace and within the framework of shared responsibility. In this context, Switzerland always regrets the exercise of the veto. We reiterate that negotiations within the Council must be conducted in good faith and oriented towards common objectives in accordance with the principles of the UN Charter. We call on all Council members to demonstrate the political will that is needed for the Council to fulfill its mandate and to work towards a return to diplomacy. And if the Council cannot discharge its responsibility, it is up to this General Assembly to consider the situation and, if need be, to act. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Switzerland. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Czechia, followed by Canada and Germany.
Madam President, first of all, I'd like to state that the Czech Republic aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union. Madam President, the Czech Republic welcomes this opportunity to discuss the recent use of the veto in the Security Council. We have consistently supported the veto initiative, which gives the General Assembly an important opportunity to scrutinize the use of the veto and to hold Council members accountable for the exercise of this exceptional power. Such a prerogative must never be beyond political and moral scrutiny. This is precisely why we are here today. On the 7th of April, the Security Council failed to respond to a serious threat to regional stability and international maritime commerce. Not one, but two vetoes were cast. Russia and China chose to protect their ally, Iran, rather than support a measured and necessary response to growing dangers in the Strait of Hormuz. The draft resolution tabled by Bahrain, together with Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, sought to encourage coordinated defensive efforts to protect commercial shipping in the Strait of Hormuz. It was a modest, practical, and responsible proposal. Bahrain and its regional partners consulted seriously and thoroughly with all members of the Council, took views on board, and pursued a balanced and focused text. We supported Bahrain's initiative and deeply regret that the resolution was not adopted. Dear colleagues, we cannot ignore the scale of the threat that the current Iranian regime poses to its neighbors and to its own people. For 47 years, Iran has pursued policies that have undermined peace and security across the region. It has armed terrorist proxies, targeted civilians, threatened its neighbors, breached nuclear commitments, disrupted shipping lanes, and destabilized governments. At the same time, we all want to see tensions in the Strait of Hormuz de-escalate. We therefore welcome the diplomatic efforts currently underway and stress the importance of full respect for international law, including the law of the sea, as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. We also commend the UN Secretary General's decision to establish a UNOPS-led task force aimed at ensuring humanitarian flows through the Strait of Hormuz. This is vital to mitigating risks to global food security, and ultimately to protecting the most vulnerable. Madam President, the veto power is an extraordinary responsibility. On the 7th of April, however, we witnessed not restraint, but its reckless misuse. It did nothing to advance the Council's core mission of maintaining international peace and security. Instead, it deepened instability and uncertainty in the region and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Czechia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Canada.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President. Canada wishes to express its sincere recognition to the Kingdom of Bahrain for their leadership at the UN Security Council, representing several states of the Gulf, as well as Jordan, in efforts to protect the freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. Canada was happy to be one of the 136 co-sponsors of Resolution 2817 of the Security Council, which condemns Iran's attacks on states of the Gulf and Jordan, calls for a cessation of hostilities, and reaffirms support to sovereignty, to the protection of civilians, and to freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. Canada was therefore disappointed that the Security Council was ultimately unable to reach an agreement on the draft resolution S/2026/273 pertaining to the Strait of Hormuz. This outcome is not in sync with Canada's expectations vis-à-vis the Council's duty to act decisively given imminent threats to international peace and security, pursuant to the mandate provided to it by the United Nations Charter. Canada remains resolved to support diplomacy and dialogue so as to reach a lasting solution to the conflict and to avoid any further escalation. We will continue to support our allies and partners in the region, as well as efforts geared towards preserving the safety and security of maritime and air navigation.
President, we thank Pakistan and all the others involved in their work to facilitate recent negotiations and a ceasefire. Canada welcomes the current ceasefire, but a temporary pause is not a permanent solution. Canada reaffirms the importance of respecting international navigation rights in the Strait of Hormuz and surrounding waterways, and the safety of the seafarers whose livelihoods depend on open sea lanes. Canada is also taking concrete action. We are contributing 23.6 million barrels of oil to the International Energy Agency's collective release to stabilize global energy markets. Looking ahead, Canada is prepared to play its part in the design of an international approach to de-escalate tensions and to provide guarantees of safe passage for this essential and strategic corridor. Canada will continue to support efforts to build the broadest possible international consensus, including through the General Assembly, to uphold respect for international navigation rights as well as international law. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Canada. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Germany, followed by Italy and Malaysia.
Madam President, Germany aligns itself fully with the statement that has been delivered by the European Union this morning, and I would like to add a few additional points in my national capacity. Germany deplores that the draft resolution that was submitted by Bahrain was not adopted due to vetoes of 2 permanent members of the Security Council. The resolution would have been an important contribution for ensuring freedom of navigation and maritime security in the Strait of Hormuz. In addition, it would have sent a clear signal to Iran that it must not instrumentalize the freedom of navigation for political purposes or harm third countries. We highly appreciate Bahrain's dedicated leadership and flexibility during the negotiations, in particular by emphasizing measures of de-escalation and the necessity to abide by international law. It is thus deplorable that 2 vetoes squandered an important opportunity to contribute to overcoming a situation that affects many of the countries assembled in this building today. And I want to be clear, Iran's attacks against countries of the Gulf Cooperation Council and other countries in the region are unjustified, and they are unlawful. And the targeting of civilian infrastructure is particularly unacceptable. Iranian attacks in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf constitute a violation of international law as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. These violations of the freedom of navigation affect trade, they threaten economies, supply chains, as well as energy and food security around the globe, and ultimately they particularly hurt the most vulnerable amongst us. Madam President, Germany remains convinced that only a political solution can bring lasting peace to the region. We welcome the direct talks between the United States and Iran that started in Islamabad, and we thank Pakistan for its mediation efforts. Germany remains ready to work towards a comprehensive political solution. Iran must never acquire a nuclear weapon. It must respect its obligations under the NPT and its comprehensive safeguard agreement with the IAEA. And Iran must urgently ensure maritime security, freedom of navigation, and the free, safe, and toll-free passage in the Strait of Hormuz and adjacent seas in line with its obligations under international law. The Security Council must not be paralyzed when regional stability and international peace and security are at stake. For our part, Germany, we will continue to support diplomacy, de-escalation, and a negotiated solution. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Germany. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Italy.
Your Excellency, Madam President, dear colleagues, Italy aligns itself with the statement delivered by the European Union and wishes to add some remarks on its national capacity. Italy thanks Pakistan and the other regional partners for their efforts to facilitate talks on the situation in the Gulf region. There is no alternative to dialogue. We always said that diplomacy is the only way, and we hope new talks will take place soon towards a substantive negotiated settlement and that the ceasefire is respected, including in Lebanon. Deputy Prime Minister and the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Italy, Antonio Tajani, visited Beirut on Monday to express solidarity and support to President Aoun and Lebanese institutions at this critical time. We must avoid other civilian casualties and encourage dialogue. In this regard, we welcome the announcement a few minutes ago of a ceasefire in Lebanon and hope all parties will uphold it. Italy is very worried for the situation in the Strait of Hormuz. What happened has serious consequences for the global economy and for food security in the most fragile countries. When the environment will be conducive, we are in favor of appropriate efforts to contribute to ensuring freedom of navigation in the Strait of Hormuz. Italy is also very concerned for the impact on relations between Iran and the other Gulf countries. It is crucial to rebuild trust. Italy is always ready to do its part for peace and stability, and to this end, we remain in close contact with all partners involved. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Italy. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Malaysia, followed by Indonesia and Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. Malaysia aligns itself with the statement delivered by the Philippines on behalf of ASEAN. Malaysia is deeply concerned over the recent escalation of military actions and retaliatory strikes across the Middle East. These developments threaten regional stability and run counter to the principles of sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the prohibition on the use of force under the UN Charter. We call on all parties to exercise maximum restraint and hostilities and avoid any further escalation. We acknowledge the restraint shown by member states of the Gulf Cooperation Council. Such restraint is critical to ongoing efforts toward de-escalation of tensions. Malaysia further stresses that responses to the conflict must be even-handed and avoid selective attribution of responsibility. Peace cannot be built on double standard. It can only be built on fairness, consistency, and respect for international law. Above all, the root causes of this conflict must be addressed. Without this, we will only continue to manage symptoms while the crisis deepens beneath the surface. Madam President, Malaysia is also deeply disturbed by the continued military attacks by Israel on Lebanon. These actions constitute serious violations of international law and directly undermine sovereignty as well as the territorial integrity of Lebanon. We condemn the attacks on UNIFIL peacekeepers in southern Lebanon, which have caused death and injuries, as well as damages to UNIFIL assets. These are not just attacks on a mission, but on the very principles of peacekeeping and the UN itself. Those responsible for the attacks must be held accountable. In this challenging time, however, we see a window for diplomacy. Malaysia welcomes the temporary ceasefire paving the way for negotiations between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. This pause creates space for dialogue and mediation toward a more lasting solution. We also take note of emerging proposals that could serve as a basis of engagement. They must now be translated into a comprehensive peace agreement. Malaysia therefore urges all parties to fully respect and implement the ceasefire in good faith and abide by international law. Any provocative action now risks unraveling fragile progress with consequences not only for the region but for global economic and energy stability. We commend all diplomatic and mediation efforts, including the constructive engagement by Pakistan. Malaysia remains ready to support all efforts to advance peace and stability in the region. We also call for unimpeded humanitarian access to all affected civilian populations. Malaysia reaffirms the importance of freedom of navigation and the security of critical maritime routes in accordance with international law. Madam President, the situation once again exposes a troubling reality. The Security Council is not functioning as it should in the face of crisis. Whether in Gaza, Lebanon, or the wider Middle East, the Council has too often been unable to act decisively when it is most needed. This debate under General Assembly Resolution 76/262, or the Veto Initiative, provides an important platform for member states to deliberate on matters affecting international peace and security and to uphold the principles of transparency and accountability. Malaysia therefore reiterates its long-standing call for reform of the veto with a view to its eventual abolition. A reformed, expanded, and more representative Security Council would be better equipped to discharge its responsibilities under the Charter effectively and credibly. To conclude, Madam President, Malaysia urges all parties to return to the most basic principles that bind us as a global community: respect for international law, the UN Charter, international humanitarian law, and the protection of civilians above all. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Malaysia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Indonesia.
Madam President, Indonesia fully aligns with the statement made by the Philippines on behalf of ASEAN. Today, once again, the Security Council's credibility is being tested. Once again, the Council is falling short of its mandate to maintain international peace and security. Specifically this time, it is about safeguarding strategic maritime corridors that underpin global supply chains and addressing the humanitarian consequences that follow. Madam President, the consequences of this war are felt across the region and beyond. The impact is immediate and severe. Therefore, we encourage and support the Secretary General to establish special mechanism as an interim measure to ensure the flow of traffic for critical commodities such as fertilizer, oil and gas, to mitigate food and energy insecurity in many countries. Madam President, with goods, oil and gas, people also pass through these waters. Seafarers of all nations now face growing risks, with about 20,000 are stranded at sea. We call for all parties to ensure the safety of seafarers and ships in accordance with the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea and the relevant standard and recommended practices by the International Maritime Organization. The sea is a global common good. It is in our collective interest to safeguard it, including its regime of transit passage. Indonesia therefore calls on all states to exercise maximum restraint, prevent further escalation, and act in full conformity with international law, including in particular the 1982 UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. We firmly believe that sustained engagement and credible negotiation remain the only viable path to ending this war. Going forward, Indonesia underscores the urgency of littoral states and key countries to develop confidence-building measures that can ensure the continued security and stability of maritime routes in the Strait of Hormuz. Madam President, lastly, our meeting today must not become just another procedural exercise. It must catalyze the Security Council to act decisively to deliver tangible progress on the ground and to undertake long overdue reform so that it can effectively fulfill its mandate. Only through action can we restore stability and protect humanity for the region and beyond. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Indonesia. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea, followed by Thailand and Sierra Leone.
Thank you, Madam President. The Strait of Hormuz is one of the most vital maritime corridors in the world, through which a significant portion of global energy supplies transit daily. It is also a vital channel for exports of fertilizer from the Middle East, as about 1/3 of the world's fertilizer trade normally passes through this strait. Therefore, any disruptions to its safety and security carries profound implications, not only for the region, but also for the stability of our interconnected global economy and society, as we witnessed recently. Against this perilous backdrop, my delegation notes with regret that the members of the Security Council fail to bridge their differences on this issue despite the urgency and importance of the situation. The Republic of Korea calls on the Council to take appropriate action to ensure transit passage and freedom of navigation in the Strait, and to continue their efforts to take collective measures to uphold the Council's primary responsibility for the peace and security by close and constructive consultations. My delegation also hopes that failure to adopt the resolution will not send a wrong message that threatens to navigational rights and freedom can be justified or be used as a weapon in any warfare. Madam President, my government would like to reiterate the importance of the following 3 points. First, freedom of navigation is a fundamental principle of international law, as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, and must be respected at all times. The principle is sacrosanct for ensuring the uninterrupted flow of global trade and energy. We express grave concern on threats and attacks on vessels, and underscores that no country should be able to decide which ships or cargoes may pass through the strait or impose charges. We would like to reaffirm that the status of the Strait of Hormuz as an international waterway, where all ships and aircraft enjoy the right of transit passage. In this regard, my government is ready to join international efforts with our partner countries to safeguard the principle of freedom of navigation. Second, my delegation would like to underscore that only dialogue, diplomacy, and good faith engagement can lead to a sustainable and peaceful solution. The ongoing peace talks among parties should continue until an agreement be finally reached. At the same time, any durable ceasefire must be fully respected. In this connection, we commend the continued efforts of the mediators, particularly Pakistan, as the host of recent peace talks, for their constructive role in facilitating dialogue and de-escalation. We also highly commend the Gulf countries for exercising restraint from engaging in the conflict, despite Iran's direct attacks. In the same spirit, my delegation highly appreciates the tireless efforts of the Secretary General, including the engagement of his personal envoy, Zhang Arno, who continues to consult closely with key stakeholders in the Middle East. Third, we emphasize the importance of the strengthened international cooperation to safeguard maritime security. This includes enhanced information sharing, confidence building measures, and coordinate responses for the safety at sea. Madam President, the stability of the Strait of Hormuz is not just a regional matter. It is a global imperative that requires our collective responsibility. My government remains firmly committed to working with all member states to promote peace, stability, and secure safety of international sea lanes and freedom of navigation. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of the Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Thailand.
I wish to thank Madam President for convening this meeting on such an urgent and extremely important matter. Thailand fully aligns itself with the ASEAN statement delivered by the Philippines and would like to make the following statement in our national capacity. Madam President, we share the profound concern of the international community over the situation in the Middle East. A prolonged conflict, while inflicting immense suffering on innocent civilians on the ground, carries serious and far-reaching repercussions, not only for regional stability, but also for global security, energy markets, and the world economy. Disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz directly threaten critical global energy supply chains and disproportionately affect energy importing countries, including, of course, Thailand. While not a party to the conflict, Thailand is directly affected by its consequences. A Thai-flagged commercial vessel was struck in the Strait of Hormuz, with 23 Thai crew members badly affected, while other vessels remain stranded. We therefore call on all parties to respect freedom of navigation and the right of safe transit passage in accordance with international law, including, in particular, the 1982 UNCLOS. The safety and security of civilians and seafarers must remain a priority. We also underscore the obligations of all parties to protect civilians and civilian infrastructure in full compliance with international humanitarian law. Madam President, Thailand welcomes the two-week ceasefire between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. We commend the mediation efforts of the Islamic Republic of Pakistan and all parties involved. It is a positive step, yet it remains extremely fragile. Without full and effective implementation of the ceasefire and sustained dialogue in good faith, peace will remain elusive and civilian suffering will, of course, persist. In closing, Thailand calls on all parties to respect principles of international law, including the Charter of the United Nations, exercise the utmost restraint, immediately de-escalate tensions, and return to dialogue, diplomacy, and negotiations towards a comprehensive and lasting resolution. I thank you for your kind attention.
I thank the distinguished representative of Thailand. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone, followed by South Africa and Pakistan.
Madam President, I thank you for convening this debate on the use of the veto in accordance with General Assembly Resolution 76/262. On 28 February, our world was confronted with yet another instance of the use of force not in conformity with the Charter of the United Nations and international law. The subsequent developments have not only undermined the Charter's prohibition on the use of force and the parameters governing the exercise of the inherent right of self-defense, but have also raised serious concerns regarding compliance with international humanitarian law in the conduct of hostilities. In response to this development, the Security Council has considered the ongoing hostilities in the Middle East and led to the adoption of Resolution 2817, which Sierra Leone co-sponsored. Subsequently, on 7 April 2026, the Council also considered a draft resolution under the agenda item, the situation in the Middle East, proposed by Bahrain and the Gulf Cooperation Council. 11 Council members voted in favor, while 2 permanent members cast negative votes and 2 members abstained. As a result, the draft resolution was not adopted. And we have taken note of the explanations of vote delivered by those member states that cast non-concurring votes. While we regret that the text was not adopted, particularly given the aim of halting attacks and threats against merchant and commercial vessels in and around the Strait of Hormuz,
We nevertheless hope that the current ceasefire will be extended and that the root causes of the conflict will be addressed in order to secure lasting peace and stability in the region. We therefore commend Pakistan for their continued mediation effort, and we also commend the efforts of the UN Secretary General and relevant UN agencies. Madam President, the debate provides Member States with an important opportunity to reflect on the impact of the veto on the functioning, credibility, and effectiveness of the Security Council in discharging its mandate. It also compels us to consider the real consequences of Council's paralysis on the lives and livelihoods of people affected by the conflict directly and indirectly. For Africa and for Sierra Leone in particular, the economic impacts of the current conflict are already consequential. The conflict has triggered a trade shock and is rapidly evolving into a cost-of-living crisis, driven by higher fuel and food prices, rising shipping and insurance costs, exchange rate pressures, and tighter fiscal conditions. The fertilizer shortage may prove even more consequential than the oil shock, as disruption to liquefied natural gas supplies has affected ammonia and urea production during a critical planting season in many parts of Africa. For Sierra Leone, if the conflict persists, war risk insurance premiums will rise sharply, vessels will continue to divert via the Cape of Good Hope, and the cost of essential imports, including fuel, food, pharmaceutical, construction materials, and industrial input will increase significantly. If these trends continue beyond June 2026, good projection is that growth could slow sharply, inflation could rise again, fiscal pressures could deepen, and more of our people could be pushed into extreme poverty. In light of the foregoing, Sierra Leone calls on the involved parties to exercise maximum restraint and to pursue dialogue and the peaceful settlement of dispute in accordance with Article 33 of the Charter of the United Nations. We underscore the fundamental importance of respect for the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of all states, as well as strict adherence to the prohibition on the use of force as enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. Finally, Madam President, there is no doubt that the Security Council must be reformed to reflect present-day geopolitical realities. The question of the veto remains one of the 5 clusters under our discussions in the intergovernmental negotiations, and it is our sincere hope that as Member States, we will reach agreement to address the structural injustice and the responsible use of the veto, for greater power comes with greater responsibility. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Sierra Leone. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of South Africa.
Madam President, we meet today in accordance with the automatic requirement of the General Assembly Resolution 76262 to convene when the veto is used in the Security Council. South Africa appreciates the opportunity for the General Assembly to consider this unprovoked and destructive conflict in the Middle East, where war is severely impeding the development agendas of targeted states. We recall that on 28 February, the current conflict began with a breach of Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. Considering the conflict's incalculable threat to international peace and security and its impact on the global economy, the use of the veto prevented an even further escalation of the conflict that would have solicited more states to become involved, resulting in further devastating political, economic, and social consequences for the entire world. Madam President, South Africa welcomes current initiatives as well as the ongoing efforts aimed at achieving a comprehensive end to the conflict in the Middle East and advancing a just, sustainable, and lasting peace. An immediate cessation of all attacks and threats of attack, as well as strict compliance for such undertakings, is imperative to prevent the future recurrence of such aggressions. Respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the affected countries in the region must be respected by all parties concerned. In accordance with international human rights and international humanitarian law, civilian populations and civilian infrastructure must never be targeted or attacked by any party under any circumstances. South Africa urges all parties to return urgently and in good faith to dialogue and inclusive negotiations, and reaffirms its support for credible, impartial mediation efforts aimed at bringing an end to the conflict and securing a durable and just peace for all the countries in the region. South Africa is equally alarmed by Israel's continued illegal, indiscriminate military operations in Lebanon, which have resulted in civilian casualties, the destruction of essential infrastructure, the displacement of communities, and the death of UN peacekeepers. These attacks constitute a serious breach of Lebanon's sovereignty and territorial integrity, and further destabilizes the region, compounding an already volatile and fragile situation. The killing of peacekeepers deployed by our organization by a fellow member state can never be condoned. South Africa is equally concerned by responses by Iran against several Gulf countries, which can also be considered a violation of the UN Charter. While Iran has the legal and moral right to defend itself against those states that engaged in armed attacks against it, its actions against the Gulf Cooperation Council states should be in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter and not violate the sovereignty of the affected states. These attacks against the GCC states heighten the risk of a broader regional conflagration. While we note the adoption of UN Security Council Resolution 2817, which strongly condemns Iran's military attacks on civilians and infrastructure in GCC countries and Jordan, we are disappointed that at the time the Council was unable to call for and guarantee an immediate ceasefire and the commencement of diplomatic efforts towards a peaceful, negotiated settlement. It is the core duty and responsibility of the UN Security Council to ensure peace and the pacific settlement of disputes, and not to decontextualize and escalate a crisis. South Africa believes that the international community has a shared responsibility to uphold the principles of freedom of navigation and to ensure the safe passage of vessels. We urge all parties to work towards a peaceful resolution of the conflict and to respect international law. In this respect, we urge all parties to exercise maximum restraint and to ensure that any actions taken are fully consistent with international law. Related developments pose systemic risks for countries like South Africa that depend on stable international legal regimes and frameworks, including the International Maritime Organization and the UN Convention on the Law of the Sea. The increasing normalization of coercive maritime practices outside multilateral structures could erode global norms that safeguard freedom of navigation. Madam President, the Security Council must take lessons from the ill-conceived use of force in Libya, not respecting the letter and spirit of Resolution 1973. The broad nature of the present failed draft would have been even more unclear on the permissibility of the use of force, thus opening the door for possible abuse or misinterpretation. Madam President, South Africa remains steadfast in its belief that there is no military solution to this crisis. All parties must prioritize de-escalation, avoid further confrontation, and pursue diplomatic negotiations in good faith, preferably through established multilateral mechanisms under the auspices of the United Nations. Despite the commendable attempts by Pakistan to broker peace, the trust deficit as a result of Iran being attacked twice in the midst of negotiations seems insurmountable without sufficient guarantees. South Africa echoes the call of the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights for all states to uphold international human rights and humanitarian law, and to act in a manner consistent with the principles of our shared humanity. We believe that the Strait of Hormuz is a vital international shipping route for goods and energy and should not be blocked by any party to this conflict. South Africa calls for the restoration of normal passage through the strait as the situation is adversely impacting countries around the world. Madam President, the choice of war appears to have become a default despite our collective undertaking consistent with the obligations in the UN Charter not to use war as a means to resolve our differences. We should not ignore rising threats of a further act of aggression against another member state, the island state of Cuba. Illegal acts of aggression against Cuba can only compound the already devastating effects of the decades of old blockade. In conclusion, South Africa reiterates the importance of making real and meaningful progress towards peace rather than contributing towards further divisiveness. We reaffirm our position that the parties to the current conflict should begin to identify areas of common interest in a spirit of compromise and flexibility, rather than continue to go down a path of destruction. There can be no victor in this war of choice, as the cost for the parties, the region, and the international community have already been far too grave. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of South Africa. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Pakistan, followed by Tunisia and Morocco.
Madam President, Pakistan's clear and unequivocal position on the situation in the Middle East has been expressed in the Security Council and elsewhere. Pakistan remains deeply concerned at the developments over the past weeks in the region. This conflict, whose consequences have impacted everyone in the region and beyond, should never have happened. From the outset, Pakistan prioritized de-escalation, cessation of hostilities, and return to dialogue for a peaceful diplomatic solution to this crisis. Pakistan successfully hosted the Islamabad talks on 11th and 12th of April. These talks were made possible by Pakistan's engagement with the parties, as well as outreach efforts aimed at promoting immediate cessation of hostilities and achieving peace and stability in the region. And through the Islamabad process, Pakistan is pursuing the objective of ending the war and ensuring long-term peace. Pakistan supports the sovereignty, territorial integrity, political independence, and security of all brotherly countries in the region. Pakistan has also expressed continued and unwavering support and complete solidarity with the fraternal GCC countries in these challenging times. Madam President, the Strait of Hormuz is an important international shipping route for goods and energy. Pakistan calls for the security of ships and crew members and the swift and safe passage of civilian ships and restoration of normal passage through the strait. The situation in the Strait of Hormuz is adversely impacting countries around the world, including Pakistan. The consequences for regional and global economy are evidently harsh, and Pakistanis are also suffering. The impact is felt not only in terms of energy flows, but also fertilizers and other essential commodities, thus affecting food security, cost of living, and squeezing the livelihood of the most vulnerable. IMF, for example, has warned of serious risks, raising alarms about the rise in public debt as countries around the world respond to the energy crisis. And this was a headline on the front page of today's New York Times. Interestingly, another headline on the same page referred to the stock market scaling a new peak, reflecting optimism that peace was near. This is just one perspective outside these halls as the international community follows this crisis. The options are therefore clear. If the military escalation and disruptions persist, the suffering will prolong and extend far beyond the region, translating into widespread economic hardship. Return to peace, on the other hand, will benefit all. Madam President, we agree on the urgency of the situation and the fundamental objective of reopening of the Strait of Hormuz and normalization of the situation at the earliest. This is an important issue not only for the GCC countries, but also for all states in the region and beyond, including Pakistan. It is also logical that any discussion or arrangement related to the Strait of Hormuz will have to take into account the legitimate interests of the GCC countries in accordance with international law. We are grateful and humbled that Pakistan has been recognized for its constructive diplomatic engagement in supporting the de-escalation, the ceasefire efforts, and the broader pursuit of stability between the United States and Iran. Through sustained interaction, including at the leadership level with both Washington and Tehran, as well as with other partners in the region and beyond, notably Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Turkey, and China, and others, Islamabad has sought to encourage dialogue, facilitate the exchange of messages, and help create conditions and space conducive to meaningful negotiations. This approach underscores Pakistan's consistent commitment to regional stability and international peace, reflecting our preference for principled, dialogue-oriented diplomacy in addressing complex geopolitical challenges and managing complex disputes. Madam President, Pakistan remains committed to continue playing its constructive role in promoting dialogue, fostering understanding, and supporting all efforts aimed at achieving lasting peace in the region. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Pakistan. I now give the floor to the distinguished representative of Tunisia, followed by Morocco, as the last speaker before our break at 1.
Your Excellencies, Tunisia reaffirms its total solidarity with our brothers in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the State of Kuwait, the State of Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, the Sultanate of Oman, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan, and the Republic of Iraq, while confronting all threats to their security, stability, sovereignty, and prosperity. Now, based on the constant principles of its foreign policy, Tunisia stresses its commitment to respecting all states' sovereignty, UN Charter, and rule of law, and the primacy of peaceful means in the settlement of disputes. The current tragic situation, threatening today the stability and peace of the entire world, is a direct consequence of the international community's failure to restore the imprescriptible rights of the Palestinian people on all their land as it is a direct consequence of an unprecedented moral, ethical, and human worldwide scandal, predatory attitude, and personal agendas not sufficiently denounced and clearly condemned. Thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Tunisia. Now I give the floor to the distinguished representative of Morocco.
Madame la Présidente.
Madam President, there are times where history calls upon nations to rise up and defend what they believe in. Today, the Kingdom of Morocco defends the values that the founding fathers of our organization enshrined in the Charter: national sovereignty of states, territorial integrity, and collective security. These values are today being tested. The security of brotherly Arab countries has been violated. The capacity of the multilateral system to respond with a single voice to the challenges in front of us is also being tested. It is in this context that the Kingdom of Morocco would like to reaffirm its three principal positions. First of all, the Kingdom of Morocco condemns in the strongest possible terms the abject Iranian aggression using missiles, which violated the integrity and security of the brotherly countries Saudi Arabia, UAE, the Kingdom of Bahrain, the State of Qatar, the State of Kuwait, and the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan and the Sultanate of Oman. We consider this to be a flagrant violation of national sovereignty of these states, an inadmissible attack on their security, and a direct threat to the stability and security not just of the region, but of the world as a whole. Secondly, the Kingdom of Morocco welcomes the announcement of a ceasefire between the United States and the Islamic Republic of Iran. We support the facilitation provided and much appreciated provided by Pakistan to these negotiations. Thirdly, the Strait of Hormuz is a strategic artery, and its central role for the global economy and the stability of international trade is universally acknowledged. We underscore the importance of making sure that the Strait safeguards its role that it's playing for prosperity and stability of all nations. Madam President, some things are confirmed with time. During the summit in Morocco in 2016, His Majesty Mohammed VI, may Lord protect him, reaffirmed that Morocco is always considered that the security and stability of the Gulf Arab states is inextricably linked to the stability of the Kingdom of Morocco. What damages you also affects us, and what impacts us also impacts you. End of quote. And following this royal vision, we reaffirm our full solidarity with the Arab states in the Gulf and its full support to all of the legitimate measures who they will deem necessary to preserve their security, ensure the safety of their nationals and residents on their soil. To conclude, Madam President, I would like to say that the peace in the region of the Gulf is a peace for the world entire. Peace which is the most precious heritage that we can bequeath to future generations. I thank you.
I thank the distinguished representative of Morocco. We have heard the last speaker in this debate for this meeting. We shall hear the remaining speakers this afternoon at 3 p.m. in this hall. The meeting is adjourned.